Welcome to another episode of Ask the Experts. I'm your co-host, Jeffrey Walk.
And I'm Elizabeth Finlayson. We're from the networking group, TNG, which is Chicago's premier business networking group focused on helping members and making a difference in the communities we serve. Ask the Experts is an effort to share our knowledge with a wider audience.
Each week, Ask the Experts responds to questions from individuals and organizations about a problem they have faced.
We always welcome questions and feedback, and you can reach us at asktheexperts@gmail.com. That's asktheexperts, all one word, @gmail.com. On to this week's episode. Hi, in today's episode, we will explore the option of engaging a patient advocate for yourself or members of your family. Our guest today is Gayle Byck of InTune Health Advocates, a patient advocate.
Gayle, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us about your company and the services that you provide?
Hi, Jeffrey and Elizabeth. Thank you so much for having me on Ask the Experts. I'm a private patient advocate and my business is InTune Health Advocates. I think everyone would agree that our healthcare system is complicated and frustrating. When I speak to a group, I usually ask, have you or anyone you know ever felt overwhelmed or frustrated with anything related to your healthcare or health insurance? I've never had anyone not raise their hand. Based on personal experiences, what I see and hear from others, and research, I really believe that most of the problems people experience with navigating our healthcare system are a result of poor communication and coordination. It can be really difficult to question providers, to know what to ask, and then to be able to make sense of all the information coming at you, especially if it's coming from multiple specialists. It's especially challenging to do this when you're emotionally overwhelmed by a serious illness or you're filled with worry about how you're going to afford the cost of your care. As a private patient advocate, I can help with building effective relationships with providers, researching and identifying treatment options, helping you understand your insurance coverage and what your care will cost, identifying support services, discussing end-of-life care, and so much more. I work with my clients to find out their needs, and my goal is to help them feel informed, supported, and empowered as they go through their healthcare journey. I collaborate with the client, the members of their healthcare team, and if appropriate, family members. It's really about collaborating and working together as partners. I don't provide medical advice. Basically, I strive to make a difficult situation easier for everyone.
You mentioned that pretty much everybody gets frustrated with the health system and how complicated it is. So how do I know when it's a good time to call for your help?
So as you said, I think everyone, people of all ages, it's not just, older adults. Anyone going through a difficult situation can benefit from having someone with them during the process. And that person might be a very capable and available friend or family member, or it might be a private patient advocate. And so some of the questions I think someone could ask themselves to determine whether they could benefit from hiring a private patient advocate include, am I having trouble understanding or hearing what the doctor is telling me? Is it difficult for me to ask the doctor questions or to let him or her know that I don't understand? Am I too emotionally overwhelmed by the situation to think clearly? Do I need someone to talk through the situation with and come up with a plan of action? Do I need more information than I'm easily able to obtain from my providers or on my own? I could give you an example. I recently worked with a client who was elderly. She had no family nearby who could help. And in her words, she didn't want to be a burden on her friends. She had advanced cancer. So I accompanied her to her doctor appointments. She had told me that she didn't like her oncologist. And when I went with her, I thought she was right. And so I helped her find someone who was more compassionate. I researched treatment options for her, and I actually discovered that there was a test for a genetic mutation that she hadn't been offered. So I arranged for her to get that because it would have given her another medication option. She also had been kind of bouncing back between the hospital and a skilled nursing facility, and those transitions weren't going well. So I arranged a meeting with the liaison from the skilled nursing facility, with a nurse at the hospital, her and I, and we sat down and we talked through what was going on, what information wasn't being delivered, in the best way, and what we could do to make these future transitions go more smoothly. We also talked about and planned for end of life care. And, when we went to the doctor appointment where she was told that there was nothing else they could do and that she probably only had weeks left to live, I was the one that was there with her, and I held her hand through that, and I hugged her after. And I always tell people that's the most important thing I've done, because she really would have been alone at that moment. And that was a really tough moment for her, and to even be present for someone during. So.
Wow. One of the things that occurs to me is just like how emotional your work is, as well as how necessary it is to be grounded into like the logistics and the facts of what's going on. And I guess one thing is, I wondered, if I had a family member with a serious diagnosis, would I call you to guide me in obtaining a second opinion? Would that be one of the things that you do?
Yes, that is something that I could help with. I find that people often just are kind of at a loss as to what to do next. And I often hear, especially from my clients who are older women, that they don't feel heard by their doctors, and they can be a little just shy about pushing for answers or trying to find out other treatment options that might not have been suggested or offered to them. And then people often do what I call the smile and nod. The doctor's telling you something and you don't want to admit that you don't understand. So I help people, just figure out what information they need and help them get that information. And that may include going to someone for a second opinion. It involves preparing for appointments, really spending time thinking about what do you want to get out of that appointment? What questions do you have? The average doctor appointment is 11 minutes. So it's not a whole lot of time. So if you can if you can spend time thinking about it and prepping for it and prioritizing your concerns, you can get a lot more out of it. It's sort of like a business meeting. Have an agenda. Your agenda is your list of questions and your issues that you want to get through.
It's really interesting because, a lot of the questions come when you're about to be admitted, when you're about to have a procedure, but oftentimes patients are increasingly released, maybe before they even should, and it can be very confusing. And they kind of whisk you out and everything's taken care of, and there may be tubes or wires hanging out of you. And when something like that happens, especially if it's a serious illness, there's usually a million questions, and there's like the follow-ups. If a family member is due to be released from a hospital or a care facility, it can be very emotional. It can be confusing. Is that something that you can help with, families and patients out with?
Absolutely. And in my earlier example, I talked a little bit about how the transitions can be difficult from home to skilled nursing. From hospital to skilled nursing, or hospital to home, or skilled nursing to home. And you're mentioning the discharge process being kind of thrown out. I always say, imagine you're in the hospital for a few days. You're tired because they're waking you up all night long to check your vitals and give you medications. You're there. If you're in the hospital these days, you're really sick. So you don't feel well. You're probably weaker than when you went in because you've been lying in bed. And the discharge planner comes in and starts going over what you need to do next. And all you want to do is get out of there. All you want to do is go home. And you're just nodding along, and they're going through all this stuff. And then you get home and you realize, wait, what appointments do I need? What are the signs and symptoms that I need to be looking out for so that I know if I need to call my doctor or go back to the hospital? Was I still supposed to be taking this medication? I have it already, but did they take me off of it? Was I supposed to get some home care? And you forgot because you're so overwhelmed, you're tired, and you just wanted to get out of the hospital. So I think it's really important to have someone there at the discharge with you who can ask questions, and then who can be at your house with you and go through it again once you're home. So like you're settled, you've had some sleep, you're a little calmer, and then you go through it all again, and set up any resources that you need to help you with your recovery. Maybe your family doesn't live nearby, and they want someone who's just that liaison, who can keep them informed about your condition, who can check in, who can make sure everything's taken care of that needs to be taken care of, and that can keep you from having to go back to the hospital. You want to avoid that readmission, and you need someone looking out for you and making sure you know what you need to do.
Yeah, I think that would be extremely helpful. I know a number of cases where I could have used those services, for family members and friends. So that's great to know. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about, like, I played that role for my mom when she had cancer and I was in my 20s. And I remember we'd come out of an appointment and I'd say, well, what did you think about this? Or I'm not sure about this medication they mentioned. And my mom would say, what? I don't remember that. And I think all of the emotions she was going through, she wasn't able to process the information in the same way as the other person in the room, who happened to be me, but I could see could really be a you, would be probably more helpful.
I remember last year I was going to a bunch of oncology appointments with someone who was about my age, and she was literally shaking at each appointment. There was no way she could process it, and I was taking all these notes, and I had prepared questions in advance, and I always want my client to ask their own questions. That's part of being empowered and feeling more in control. But I'm there to ask questions if they forget, or if something comes up during the appointment. But literally, she just looked scared out of her mind throughout the entire appointment. And so it was so important that someone was with her, so that and then we would spend time afterwards going over it all again. And again, I'm not a clinical expert. I'm not trying to take a place of a doctor. I'm just trying to make sure that people understand what's being told to them, and then we can write down any follow-up questions that may come up, or figure out what else might need to happen so that that you get the best care possible.
Even the reduction of stress in a patient can make a huge difference in their prognosis and their recovery. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So do any of your clients establish a relationship with you in advance, like to handle paperwork or authorization? And is that necessary?
So that's the ideal situation, is that I call it proactive patient advocacy. You think about some of the stories I've shared already and how personal the information can be, and what personal moments can be going on, with a health situation. And if I can establish a relationship with the person ahead of time, you get to know each other, I have a sense of their current health status, their medical history, what medications they're on, who their providers are, who's their healthcare power of attorney. And if they don't have one, I'll help them make sure that they get that in place, because it's so important. And have contact information for their family members or their close friends. And those family members would have contact information for me if something were to come up. So the ideal situation is to have a relationship in advance, but it doesn't happen that way. People usually call when there's a crisis, so we figure it out. I mean, I've literally received phone calls from people in California saying, my mom just got taken to the hospital. Could you go there and help figure out what's happening? And then I have to say, does your mom want me there? You can't just show up in someone's hospital room, and then there's forms that have to be signed, and I don't know anything about the person going in. Now, I can roll with the situation if everyone's on board, but an ideal scenario would be to have a relationship in advance.
That's great to know. I think a lot of people don't think of you like insurance or pre-planning, but I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, patient advocacy is a newer field, so I think that's where we're trying to get to, is that,
right.
Establish relationships in advance, and, having that information so that when there is a crisis, it's available. And really everyone who calls me is stressed out. You wouldn't be calling me, if you weren't, whether it's about the bills or the health. And so I'm totally aware of that, and, and make that work.
So, we've talked about a lot of these, emergency kind of situations. Are there scenarios where if a family member needs let's say a medical procedure, it's not an emergency, but there may be some complexity to it, or there's decisions they have to make? Is that something that maybe someone would call you for guidance first?
Yes, and I spoke a little bit about that already in terms of, how to prepare for an appointment, going to the doctor with someone. I had a client who I helped this summer. I went to a couple appointments with her. She had been trying for months to get the one doctor to send her to another doctor, and there was a certain, she knew there was a certain procedure she wanted, and she just couldn't seem to express how much pain she was in. And so we just talked through that whole scenario, and I said, you really need to be honest with the doctor, and not try to make it sound like you're powering through it, and really share like what hurts and where and when, and all of that. And so she ended up feeling, she said she felt so much more confident after we talked through how to handle the appointments, and she did great at the appointment. She totally ran with it, and she was really proud of herself after. So that's part of just helping someone feel empowered. And she got the referral she needed, and she got the procedure she needed, and all is good.
That's great. So you mentioned, that you could help out with some of the billing and some of the complexity on the post-procedure end of things. And, can you advocate on behalf of medical insurance and say, hey, I'm looking at these bills, something's not adding up right over here? Because talk about stress. Maybe you got through the procedure okay, but oh my God, it's an avalanche of worry and frustration.
Yeah, so I do that often. I can give you a couple of examples. I worked with a woman who came to me. She had about $150,000 in medical bills. So she was quite stressed, and it was all considered out of network. And, talking through the situation with her, well, she clearly had an emergency and was taken unconscious to an out of network hospital, and was then being billed out of network. Well, Illinois has a law that protects patients in that situation, but the hospital wasn't billing her that way. The insurance company hadn't stepped in and, figure out anything was off with the coding. And so I got involved and helped resolve those bills. So her $150,000 in bills ended up being $7,300, which was her deductible and out-of-pocket maximum. So she was quite happy. And but it took a long time. It was a lot of persistence and just having the knowledge about the law and the coding and who to go to. And you can't call the number on your billing statement and expect that you're going to get anywhere with the customer service rep who answers. I had another situation where a couple had their baby. Their insurance had switched, and the doctor was in network, and it turned out the hospital was out of network. So they got this huge bill for the hospital portion. And, digging through things a bit, they had pre-registered for labor and delivery like they're required, but the hospital never told them we're out of network. So I made an argument. They had spent a year and a half trying to get the bill reduced. And I made an argument, went to the right person, and ended up that they only paid their deductible. So again, you can't always be looking to get zero. You have to look at what's fair, and we do have the system of deductibles. So I also help people appeal denials from their insurance companies. I have this saying that insurance companies are bigger and badder than the rest of us. And basically they're just waiting for us to give up, right? Because you're on hold. If you're at work during the day, how much can you spend an hour waiting to talk to Blue Cross or whatever insurance company, and then trying to figure out how to get anywhere? And so just persistence, knowledge, experience that gets you far. And I've had really good success for my clients when it comes to, insurance companies and these bills.
Well, those stories alone and the scenarios that you provided, many people I'm sure can relate to. Many of our viewers I'm sure would appreciate that. And I think that would be extremely helpful to know that there's somebody that can help them out, because that's when, I mean, it can get very confusing. And you're right, it's a war of attrition. And unless you have someone in your back pocket that you can call, like a Gayle, you're really out there on the lurch.
I had one client who they were trying to get their in vitro fertilization treatment covered, and the guy was a teacher, and he said he's literally spent his entire summer on the phone with the insurance company and didn't get anywhere. And I got it resolved in one phone call. And I felt like it was a combination of, I asked the one right question, but I also, by identifying myself as a private patient advocate, I feel like it's often putting the insurance company on notice that, like, this person's not going away. They brought someone else in. And so when I called him after and I'm like, all right, your treatment's covered. And he just kept saying, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I literally spent my entire summer, working on this. And of course, it was better for him than me, because it was literally one phone call to resolve the whole thing. But, he was quite happy, and it took a lot of stress off.
Gayle, I have to say I'm just really impressed with those stories. I think many of us have had those experiences of either spending that summer on the phone or not, and just paying whatever there is to pay. And also, when I understood about your business, my assumption was like, you go in and you solve problems, as some of these stories have indicated. But I really love the part of getting the patient to feel confident enough to ask their own questions and to feel empowered. I'm very impressed with that. And so I guess what I'd love to understand is, like, are you able to help meet with a family and help them prepare for meeting with a medical professional? In some ways, like, I see you as like almost like a professional daughter, friend / expert. So how do you help the family in those situations as well?
Right. Sometimes I say I'm like the adult daughter plus. But yes, often when I've worked where the client's been an older adult, it's generally their adult children who I work more with, because they're the people who really feel overwhelmed taking care of an aging parent. And so there'll be a lot of time, talking through different issues. Keep mom at home, send her to an assisted living. What do we do after the hospital stay? Just keeping in touch. There's a client I just worked with for a long time, and since none of the family were here, I was the main contact with the doctor. And, I was the liaison between the doctor and the home health nurse and the caregivers, and then the family that were all out of town. And so there is a lot of work with the families.
That makes a lot of sense. And so we've talked about scenarios in which, like, it'd be ideal if people, worked with you in advance. And then, you mentioned about, like, in California, someone trying to engage you in short notice, like, can you be here? It's like, no, I'm not here at the moment. Can people engage you on short notice? How does that work?
They can, and they have. It has to, again, everyone has to be on board. I'm not going to show up in someone's hospital room while they're in their hospital gown and, just waltz in and say, hey, your daughter called and wants to be here. Like, as long as everyone's on board and I can get there, then I'm happy to help out on short notice.
Gayle, it's been great talking to you. If folks want to get in touch with you, how can they reach you?
My website is www.intunehealthadvocates.com, or my email is Gayle, Gayle, @intunehealthadvocates.com. And I'm happy to talk with anyone about their their healthcare situation or their family member's situation, and figure out how we can help make the situation better.
I think after people hear this interview, you'll be getting more phone calls.
Well, I hope so. And thank you and Elizabeth for having me on here.
Thank you, Gayle, for your time today. I just felt like this information and guidance was incredibly helpful. I know my family, we're all entering new phases of life. I greatly appreciate your expertise. I know Jeffrey does, and I know our listeners will find it equally useful. So thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for watching this week's episode of Ask the Experts.
I'm your co-host, Jeffrey Walk.
And I'm Elizabeth Finlayson.
Don't forget to send us your questions, suggestions, or ideas. As always, you can reach us at asktheexperts@gmail.com. That's asktheexperts, all one word, @gmail.com.
Have a productive week.